Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we are looking at Obeka, Splitter of Seconds, a very fun upkeep commander. This is one of our donation decks, and it comes to us from Shirok, who says, "Hi Curse, I've been brewing Obeka, and she's the one commander from Junction that has caught my attention. The thing I'm finding is she's so versatile with what cards go with her that I'm having a hard time coming to a final build before I invest in the deck. I was hoping to get some help since I keep finding new stuff that goes with Obeka, and I was hoping to get the deck cleared up on what to add into the list and what other cards I may have missed, since I'm sure I have missed a bunch. The Swiss Army commander that is Obeka seems to keep on going." Absolutely. I'm very interested in this kind of deck. It has a very clear theme and idea. I think it's noteworthy that the build we have feels very much like a first draft, and I think honestly we may have gone too far into Obeka, and therefore actually almost all of my additions have nothing to do with Obeka and just are there to kind of, let's say, smooth out the rest of the deck outside of your upkeeps. Still, we have a lot to go through, a lot of cards to judge and see if they work, so thank you so much for supporting the channel and sending the deck, and let's get right into it. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is Obeka, Splitter of Seconds, and why are they our Crixus upkeep commander? Obeka is a 4-mana 2/5 Ogre Warlock in blue, black, red. She has Menace and a very powerful ability that says whenever she deals combat damage to a player, you get that many additional upkeep steps after this phase. Pretty straightforward. Obeka benefits with more power because that gives you more upkeeps, but also from evasion, even though she naturally has some. After that, we fill our deck with powerful upkeep triggers in order to make the most of her. Oops, I am going in the wrong direction. So looking at the deck itself, let's cover a few things right away. Like I said before, this does feel like an early draft, and we are maybe a bit impulsive or indulgent in the amount of upkeep cards that we are running. They are not all equal, and some of them are definitely better than others. Looking right off the start, we see we have 34 lands. This is definitely a few less than I would like. I think I would like to go to 37 or 38. We have a 4-mana commander, and if we go to 4 mana, we can see, where does it say? You have a 56% chance of playing these cards on curve. That means half the time, unless we get mana ramp, we are unable to cast our commander on curve. That's very much so not ideal. So 37, 38 lands. In addition, looking at the curve, we have quite a situation in our curve. Our curve is kind of all over the place. It goes for a very long time. We have this weird dip at 6. We have a few cards here and there that come and go. It's kind of hard to kind of place this deck, as it is once again in kind of a nice, let's say, proof of concept phase. So once again, we're going to look through this. We're going to try to cut out the high mana stuff. We're going to try to keep an eye on the 4 mana stuff because that's Obeka's cost. And with that in mind, let's go right into looking at what we can change. As I mentioned before, almost all of my additions have nothing to do with upkeeps, so we're going to look at the deck and the sideboard for cards here. In fact, this might be one of those times we're actually going to go through every card quickly because there are so many upkeep cards that I think are worth considering and worth judging in that way. Dragon Master Outcast is a pretty decent card that I think is fine at 1 mana, and I think it's going to be common with these first few that the main reason I'm not going to be too critical is that they are at 1 mana. The thing with Dragon Master Outcast is that they require to have 6 lands in play, and these colors aren't ideal at land ramp. We have a few ways to kind of cheat the game, but they are few and far between, and generally not very accessible. If we had access or we were playing Wayfarer's Bauble, I would like it a little more, so at least with that addition, I think I would keep the Dragon Master Outcast. However, otherwise, and I think we should start with this. Let's start with the idea of upkeep, right? And the way Obeka kind of interferes with this. Dragon Master Outcast, outside of a ramp deck, is a card I don't particularly like. It's 1 mana, it's very, very brittle, very easy to kill, and then you have to wait an entire turn cycle to get that dragon. Now, what Obeka does is changes that from a turn cycle wait to a combat step wait, as long as she does contact damage to one of your opponents, and that makes this card immensely more powerful. So with that, with the 1 mana, the fact that she's a 1/1, the fact that we are using abilities such as the initiative that benefit from our having low mana creatures that can deal damage, or evasive threats that come out of Dragon Master Outcast, I'm a fan of this card. I think it's a very good addition. Likewise, Creeping Bloodsucker is a card that, generally I'm not too impressed with, but with the kind of slow synergy of the deck, the fact that this doesn't have any other things to, like, hoops to jump through to trigger, just every upkeep you're gaining 3 life from, like, 1 from each of your opponents, is pretty good. And then with Obeka gaining more and more life in colors that really do lack life gain, I do particularly like this. So once again, low mana, easy to trigger, pretty good. Triskei Decaphile actually has nothing to do with upkeeps, is just kind of a general kind of side win conditions for decks that have a lot of hand manipulation. Is a fun, cute card, but I really don't think belongs here. The main thing she does outside of, is that she has a mana sink, and this deck kind of has a mana problem to start with. So with that in mind, I think she's a very, very easy cut, has basically nothing to do with the theme. And I guess the one thing is if you hit with Obeka and you have 13 cards in hand, you get to draw the card, you get to win the game a little earlier, but I don't really think that's going to happen often. Joyra of the Gitu, I believe that's how it's pronounced, is I think one of my favorite cards in the deck right now, because I think objectively this is kind of the standard of the cards we should put into the deck, where they are cards that are very good on their own and just get better with our commander. Joyra is a very decent card. As long as you have mana to spend and cards in hand, she can cheat a lot of mana costs on your cards. However, when you add in Obeka, you suspend a card, attack with Obeka, immediately take 2 counters off of it. That gets that gets much better, and I do really like that. So this is a very, very good card that I am a big fan of. On the other hand, Thassa, God of the Sea, is a card that is just barely okay generally, and only gets better when there is a thematic element to her. 3 mana to scry 1 on upkeep is already honestly pretty awful, and then getting extra scries per hit with your commander sounds good, but really isn't that impressive. The thing you gotta think about is multiple scry 1s. So let's say Obeka has 2 power, you hit, so you scry 1 twice. That's not the same thing as scrying 2 once, right? The thing with scrying multiple numbers deep is you get to see further and further down in your deck. Whereas when you scry 1 and you keep it on top, every other scry 1 you will get is kind of wasted because you're going to continue to want to keep that card on top. And this is actually somewhat amplified by our commander, because let's say we start a turn, upkeep, whatever, we scry, then we draw a card, then we hit with our commander, and we look at the top card on that first scry, on that first upkeep, and we go, oh, I'd like to keep that on top. Then the next upkeep trigger comes on, and that scry is wasted. And then you go an entire turn cycle, and that next upkeep trigger on Thassa is also wasted. That's technically 3 if you consider that the top card was never moved. You've wasted 3 scry 1 triggers because you found a card that was already on top that was good. Not ideal. There is something to be said that this ability here, target creature you control can't be blocked this turn, does synergize with our commander, but I would argue that Prowler's Helm, at a similar cost, 2 to cast, 2 to activate, is just better in every way, stays around, doesn't do much without your commander, but I do like it a lot more. The Sneak and other initiative cards. I would say, honestly, the initiative cards are the cards that are the most missing here. I think the initiative is possibly it's the strongest dungeon and probably the best payoff that is pretty neutral when Obeka is not out. The initiative is particularly strong and gets better when you can evasively hit your opponents. And therefore, there's a really nice synergy between Obeka's plan and the initiative plan. They both require the same things, they both benefit each other, and with Obeka out, the initiative plan just gets much, much better as you get multiple triggers. With that in mind, I think, like, we're a few cards in, but I think it's worth mentioning that it is the initiative plan that I think is the strongest thing to go into. And honestly, if that was the thing I would add into this deck, maybe I should just show that here, is that the initiative cards here, I think, are the strongest. Now, a lot of these get considerably better when you have already completed a dungeon, but I think also notably, something that's really nice here is that these cards are just generally good even when you have the initiative or even when the initiative is already on the battlefield, because it triggers again. Risa Real is a deck run by one of my friends and is incredibly powerful and can be played in this deck. So that's honestly, that is my addition. I think you should go deep into the initiative because I think that's the most thematic and generically powerful way to run Obeka. Going on a little further, we start having more general, what I would say, upkeep triggers. And once again, a lot of them I'm going to say I'm impressed with due to their mana cost and general utility. Twilight Prophet is an incredibly powerful card, and you just have to trigger City's Blessing, which is very doable with like treasure tokens. And when you have that, all of a sudden you are getting a very, very nice benefit whether or not Obeka is out. Wildfire Devils is okay. Unfortunately, there is going to be a lot of missing with this card, so I'm not too impressed by it, and I think I would cut it. This is probably better if you can mill your opponents out a little bit. Otherwise, you will have, you know, a 1 in 3 shot to, let's say, at least to whiff, where one of your opponents just doesn't have cards in their graveyard, and that's not even counting that the card they might exile from their graveyard is particularly weak and does not benefit you, right? There's tons of cards they can, you know, they can, if you have a blue opponent, they can exile a counterspell, and all of a sudden it hasn't done anything. Obviously, this gets better as you have higher chances of getting good stuff with your commander out, but this also is a double-edged sword where the more times this triggers, the less cards in graveyards, and therefore the more whiffs you will have. Overall, not too impressed. Bone Hoarder Dracosaur is one I'm very impressed with. All the modes of this card is rather good. Dominus of Fealty is very impressive, with the floor being that you steal a land from one of your opponents for the turn and therefore somewhat mana ramp. That being said, at this mana cost, I don't know how regularly you're going to be able to cast this, especially with your commander, especially like with black mana symbols. If you have even one swamp, this gets really bad. If you have mana rocks that don't give the right colors, this gets worse. So outside of using like Joyra to put this out there, I think this is a very difficult card to cast. Feywild Initiative, very impressed. Indulgent Tormentor, I do like. Notably this is good because every subsequent trigger is better and better. It's better and better because you are pressuring their resources. That being said, the floor is low. Indulgent Tormentor on without your commander out is just burning 3 life a turn or sacrificing the worst token on their battlefield. Otherwise, they're not going to generally let you draw a card. At a certain point, if you keep pressuring your opponent, like a single opponent where you keep hitting them over and over with targeting them, they're going to run so low on resources they're going to let you draw cards. But to get there is so clunky that I'm just not a fan. I would rather this to be any general card draw effect if that's the goal, or any form of unconditional sacrifice or burn spell, because the options of this, the fact that it's on a 5/3, all of this makes it just kind of worse. Plarg and Nasari, this one is interesting. I like this a lot more. One of the things is, once again, there is an opponent's choice involved here, but I think it's not as bad. It's still, the floor is still kind of okay. I would definitely play this and try it out for a while. And if you get this out on the turn you have Obeka and you do combat and you hit, I think this is really, really good. But I will note that this is kind of volatile. I don't mind this as much if we made this into an initiative deck, because then the floor is really high of the majority of the deck. So to have something that's so kind of random or out of your control isn't that bad, because at least in this way you don't mind it. You're like, oh, okay, at least the rest of my deck has such a high floor that having this one randomized thing with a very high ceiling, it's fine. The cost is low. So in that state, I do really like it. In the current build of the deck, I do not. Oh, Risa Riel is here. I'm sorry, I didn't see her, so perfect. Zanektar, this is once again kind of interesting. I get the idea that if you hit with your commander, you have picked all your opponents and you get all of the benefits. However, you have to remember that it is your mana, right, to cast their spells. So really what this does is this locks out your opponents during your turn. But I will note, if your lockout begins after dealing combat damage with your commander, you're really not in a phase that you need that lockout. Like, if they were going to interfere with you, they would have done it already. So all you're doing is post-combat being able to cast spells off of all of your opponent's decks, and you do not have the mana really to do that. So with that in mind, this is once again a card I'm not too impressed. Also, this is a creature who's like, is a 5/6 for no reason, I think. Maybe it's because it's a legendary creature, maybe beholders are big. Don't know a lot about Dungeons and Dragons, but you're not attacking with this creature. It doesn't have evasion. It's just kind of clunky and maybe just a little defensive. Excuse me. Herald of Leshrac is a card I really like, but one of the situations is that due to the cumulative upkeep, this is a card that gets kind of potentially worse with your commander out. One of the beauties of this card is you just start stealing lands from your opponents, and for maybe 2 or 3 or 4 turns, depending on the situation, you just keep all of those lands. And I think that's really, really good. One of the things you can do at a certain point is start removing the cumulative upkeep counters, or they should be age counters, I should say, or otherwise kind of changing how this card works, like using Dress Down, for example, and then removing it. However, this deck actually has the opposite problem, where it, rockets the the age counters and the upkeep triggers, and all of a sudden you've stolen like 6 lands in like 2 turns. And that's really, really cool, or in 1 turn, I should say, but that's really, really cool. But the thing is then the Herald is going to burn out probably next turn or the turn after, because you can't choose not to do this because you want your commander to trigger, and all of a sudden you have to give all those lands back. Likewise, when you get 2 extra upkeeps after the first upkeep with this creature, your opponents are going to tap down their remaining mana, so it's not like that mana that the lands you gain actually do anything. If you could then sacrifice the lands using one of the cards like Greater Gargadon, which you aren't playing, I think that would be really, really cute. But at the state it is, I don't think it's going to be very beneficial, and you're going to find yourself giving those lands back way sooner than you expect. With that and it's a 7 mana card, which means by definition you don't need more mana at that point. This is very, very win-more. Sheoldred's great, no problem there. Skyline, Despot. This is a weird combination because the Monarch doesn't work with the upkeep. So if you get this and someone steals the Monarch, you do just have a 5/5 flying. But much like another card, much like the Dragon Master Outcast, I mean, very much like, because they both create dragons, the fact that you can play the Despot and then immediately attack with your commander and immediately get 2 5/5 dragons who can then defend the monarchy, I like that a lot more. So overall, kind of a clunky card, but when it's good, it's going to be very, very good. Star Whale, I think is just fine. Once again, this is a 6 mana flying vigilance that gives ward 2 to everything and takes several turns that are sped up by your commander. Not ideal, because if you play it and then hit, you've only taken a third of the suspend counters off. It's not the same as Joyra, but still nothing too bad. I think the floor is just fine. I just don't see you really casting this card ever. Our two Eldrazi definitely feel win more. I'm very much so unimpressed by these cards. I'm pretty sure they're here for Joyra, but really, like, the ability to get these cards into your hand, the fact that they shuffle away so you don't even get to reanimate them, I think we can do much better. I'm generally happier with Sheoldred and the Skyline Despot. I think these ones can be cut out. All right, that's thankfully the majority of the cards. It's this and the enchantments that are the bulk of them. The sorceries that are all majority upkeep cards, I think, are fine. The instants are fine. The artifacts are kind of clunky. We have a lot of mana rocks, and I do respect the fact that we want our commander to come out as fast as possible, but all of these mana rocks kind of create this situation where our two mana slot is really big, and I'm just not a fan of that. Likewise, we have a lot of 3-drops. The Fire Shrieker I think is fine, but also, you know, a little win more. I wouldn't mind cutting like 2 of the mana rocks, I think. Just 2 is fine. Maybe replacing one of them with Felwar Stone and cutting another 2. Total, with like, as long as 2 come out, I think they're fine. Yeah. I think it's generally okay. The replicating ring is something I really like. Portal to Phyrexia, I think, is also just kind of win more. I am going to introduce some discard draw in my additions, so it gets a little better when we can force our creatures to go into the graveyard to start reanimating them, or of course we can steal our opponent's creatures. But Portal to Phyrexia's main ability is this ability here, and Joyra does exile non-creatures. I always thought she was just creatures. Okay, perfect. So you do have the means to get the portal out, but it is a bit clunky. This is another card that I see as a ceiling to your deck, and right now you have a lot of curve tops. This is definitely pushing it, but is a very powerful ETB. So if you could put maybe one other way to cheat this card into play, I would be a big fan, but at the moment, just be aware it's clunky. Magic Mirror I really want out because it's very close to the Herald, where this goes from being a good thing to a bad thing incredibly fast. Having this out, getting an upkeep, and then hitting with your commander is drawing 6 cards, which is great. And then if you do that again, you draw 4 cards, 9 cards, 15 cards. Once again, feels really good, but you can't turn this off. And all of a sudden, if you go through one more turn cycle, you are drawing 9 cards. Sorry, 7 cards. I don't come here for math. 7, 15, and then 24. I don't know how much of your deck is left. All of a sudden, like, yeah, you have tremendous advantage, but your mana problems still persist, and you don't have the ability to generate enough mana to cast all of those cards. And your opponents can kind of fog you out of the game by just fogging through your turns, or actually letting your commander hit and then forcing you to just deck out incredibly fast. So this card, I think, very much so worries me in a way that like Phyrexian Arena does not. So very notable that I do not like this card. The Hammer, I don't quite understand why this is here. It is cute that this just works with our, like, this is just cute. It's just too much mana for what it is. 4 to play, 4 to cast. This is just would have been better if every time you play this, I think you would have preferred a mana rock. I get the indestructibility is nice, but most of the time you would rather it be a mana rock to use that mana to attach the equipment, as opposed to using this kind of clunky way of doing things. All right, looking at our enchantments, a lot of them are very decent. As Foretold is a wonderful solution to our mana problems, but it is very susceptible to removal from our opponents, so be careful. I do really like it, but it is the most visible to our opponents and takes a while to kind of ramp up. So all of a sudden your opponents are very much so incentivized to get rid of it, and there's not much you can do to stop them. Descendant to Avernus is fantastic. Triumph of Cruelty feels particularly bad considering the kind of power level of this deck. Yes, we have a lot of really strong cards, but for like we have to cheat them out in play. In order to do that, we need a combination of cards, and then in order to take advantage of Triumph of Cruelty, we need to hit with our commander, and then all that does is targets one opponent to make them discard 2, which is Mind Rot, which is the same mana as Triumph of Cruelty. Do you see this the problem with this card? The ceiling feels so cool, but it's not even, I want to say like the floor isn't high enough, but the ceiling itself is actually really low too, so just not a card I particularly like. The courts, I think, are fine. I'm not too excited about them. Court of Vantress, I feel, is a lot of the time gonna whiff because there's just not a lot of key artifacts or enchantments you're gonna want to make copies of. So it's kind of wasted here. And at 4 mana, once again, clunky with our commander. They're all 4 mana, which is very clunky with our commander. Locthwain, I think, is just fine. Once again, that at least the cards are permanent, which I really do like. And Embereth is just okay. I don't really mind it. I do like that it generates creatures. This is fine. This is fine. I don't know what else to say. And Court of Ambition, I think, is probably the strongest one because of how it's just basically a better version of the Indulgent Tormentor, because it hits all of your opponents. It is a much smaller kind of choice. It's discard or lose life, and very quickly will burn them out of resources because you're hitting all opponents at once. And with the Monarchy, if you're the Monarch, you are going to have a very easy time burning your opponents out of the game. Mechanized Production, yet another 4 mana card, is, I think, very much so wish fulfillment. You are really not playing enough artifacts. This card is incredibly fragile because you can either destroy it or the artifact that it's attached to, and therefore is very weak. And yes, there are situations where you can win, especially attached to... actually, you can't use tokens with this, right? Tokens don't have names. Is that correct? I'd have to look this up. My understanding is this doesn't work with tokens, but that's not true because it would... Okay, it's a token that's a copy of it. So tokens that are generated aren't the same as token copies, right? I don't know. I'm going to be honest, even if you could attach this to a treasure and it would work, I would still be rather unimpressed by this. It's very clunky. It doesn't do anything. It's very win-more. It only works with your commander, so I don't particularly like it. Thopter Spy Network, I think, is much better. At least it creates bodies, but it's at 4 mana. Court of Ire is just okay because we're targeting instead of hitting all our opponents at once. I'm also not too impressed, and 5 mana is a lot. Subversion is okay. Look at the mana difference between Subversion and Creeping Bloodsucker. And I liked Creeping Bloodsucker because it was 2 mana. So I really don't like Subversion here. Virtue of Persistence is fine. Alright, finally, I'm going to go very quickly. Let's see how long we've been at this. We've been at this almost half an hour. I'm going to go very quickly through the sideboard, very quickly through our additions, and then talk about directions for the deck. Prowler's Helm is one that I pointed out that I think is rather good. Arcane Denial, I think, is definitely worth playing as a one of. Goblin Assault is one I really do like. Notably, this is a low mana card that creates bodies, and I think very notably the upkeeps you get with your commander fix the problem with the Goblin Assault. The idea with Goblin Assault is that you can't use the goblins defensively because they have haste and they have to attack. But if you get an upkeep after your combat phase, those creatures can be used defensively, and I really like that. Not including the fact that if you are on a, you have a situation where you have one opponent you can attack freely with the goblin tokens, you can amass an army incredibly fast. So Goblin Assault is very good, and I think it should be in the main. Paradox Haze, I think, absolutely should be in this deck because it is your backup commander. It is very good. You attach it to yourself and at least get some triggers off of the rest of stuff in your deck. Paradox Haze is such a powerful card, and you just get to play it, right? The main downside of Paradox Haze is that it's a bad card in a lot of decks. It's very strong when it's synergistic, but it's just terrible otherwise. You have a vested interest in playing this card, even though it will not trigger on your extra upkeeps. but still is so synergistic with the deck that you get to play it, so it's going to be very, very good. Whispersill Cloak is a card I always think is overcosted, but I think here is just worth playing. Braids is probably going to get you killed, I'm going to be honest. Even though this current build has all of these big mana creatures to slam into play, I think your opponents are probably going to have better versions of these creatures, or better creatures in general, and you're going to be burnt out. Darksteel Reactor is a bad Magic card. Please, everyone who plays this card, please don't play this card. This card is terrible. You have to consider, not only does this go from waiting 20 turns to waiting, 7 turns, is still insane amounts of time where you're just expecting your opponents not to interact with you. But also, notably, the way that this commander works is that each upkeep is now worth a proliferate. If you watch, I've done another video on proliferate recently. My idea on proliferate is that proliferate is worth very, very little and gets only better with what it proliferates. If you are using this to put each upkeep you put a charge counter on this card is equivalent to 1 proliferate trigger only on this card, it's just not good. That is a terrible, terrible deal, a terrible use of proliferate. Now, I know those upkeeps will do other things in the deck, but in the meantime, when you play Darksteel Reactor, all you've done is annoy all of your opponents, and now they're just going to come from you. Notably, there's a lot of exile effects that can exile this card in the format as well, so generally not going to be too impressive. Pact Weapon. Not quite sure what it's here for. I would just say don't play this. Passageway Seer for more initiative. More initiative, yes. Relic of Sauron is fine. I'm never quite impressed with this card, but it's okay. Stolen Strategy, 5 mana for this ability. Once again, I'm not too impressed. Tamio's Journal, same thing. At least this can get a tutor out of you very quickly, and a tutor out. If you start the turn with this and hit with your commander, you'll get a tutor right away, which isn't bad. But once again, why not just play a tutor? This is just too much mana. Embercleave is fine. It's just fine. I think it is very impressive. I would test this. Honestly, I would test this. The problem is your ability to trigger to reduce the mana cost on it is it's very difficult to do because you're not swinging out with a bunch of creatures. Maybe Goblin Assault helps that. But I will admit that once this attaches to your commander gets very, very strong. And I am very impressed by that. So I would definitely test it, but I would maybe be a little tempering of my expectations. I would temper my expectations with this card. Staff of Nin is pretty good, but once again, probably not the deck for it. It's just like a clunky Phyrexian Arena. Okay. That's all the cards in the deck that I thought were worth talking about. I've said to take out a lot of them, so let's quickly talk about what to add in. As I said before, definitely add in as many of these, I think as many of these initiative cards as you can, because they're very, very strong. After which, there's a few kind of cards that are just utility and power to the deck that I think are worth talking about. Reanimate, notably, and Animate Dead, I just think you have a lot of cards that you want to cheat into play, and having at least 2 ways to cheat them into play, additional once they're in the graveyard, are worth it in a deck like this. And both of these do have the ability to target your opponent's cards, and therefore I think it's pretty easy and pretty worthwhile to use these just kind of as utility. They both did get reprinted in the same deck, and they're both at low prices. This just got reprinted again, so both of them are at particularly low prices, and I think they are worth picking up. Now going into some treasure generation and draw discard. Collector's Vault, you know these cards: Seize the Spoiled, Unexpected Windfall, and Big Score. Obviously the latter 2 are a bit tougher because they're at 4 mana, which is the same as your commander. However, they generate treasures. They let you kind of spend a few turns dirtling while your commander is not out yet, so you can set up a very, very good turn. I particularly like them. I would be okay, I would say playing Collector's Vault and Seize the Spoils alone would probably be enough. Then, as always as well, for card draw, Sign in Blood, Knight's Whisper, Read the Bones, pretty much the ones you want to play, and you'd be very, very happy using them. Just getting a little extra card draw that isn't on theme I think it's worthwhile. I think honestly Knight's Whisper and Breathe the Bones is enough. Finally, a little more removal that I think is worth playing, which would be Lightning Bolt, Rapid Hybridization, and Pongify. These cards are just very, very strong. This just got reprinted as well, and I think it would help you get blockers. Well, these last two don't get rid of blockers, but they hit key targets and allow for you to ensure that you can hold down the fort against more powerful commanders. And when they only have one creature, you can Pongify it, and your menace creature will still get through because they continue to only have one creature. And that's generally what I have to say. This is a really interesting commander. Going into this, I wasn't quite sure the direction I wanted to go into, but the more I think of the initiative, the more I'm generally impressed by it. And I think I would probably go all in on that strategy, just as your core upkeep trigger. Then my backup plan would probably be Joyra and some reanimation in order to get some of these bigger creatures out. As a reminder, cards like Shieldred, cards like Skyline Despot, Star Whale, Plarg, and Nasari are just really, really good cards to begin with, or cards with such high ceilings that you're not really too upset if they're working without your commander, because if they work once, you're generally very, very happy. I hope this video was helpful to you. I'm really excited to see another draft of this deck. I think it's just started, and I'm very excited because Obeka is just awesome. I just love her, and I think this can be a build or a deck that's very, very powerful. Please let me know what you think, and please let me know if you make another draft. All right, good luck and happy deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you, and good luck in brewing and building.